And just to review the schedule today, we have it up here on this board for you if you forget. But from 1 to 3 p.m., we're going to do workshops, the same format as we did yesterday. So if you know your room, go to that one again. At 4 p.m., Sarah Bat Anderson is going to lead their class. And then at 7 tonight, we have a reading with Jay and Alejandro. And if you are interested in coming, we're going to have, just because it's Friday, we're going to have a little bit of food, a little bit of drink. Same format as last night where we're going to be in this theater a couple rooms down. We just have chairs set up. So if you'd like to sit in a room together instead of doing it over Zoom, come join us. It'll be really fun. And then really quick before I introduce Jay, I'm going to read the same thing I did yesterday morning. So before we begin this event, we'd like to invite you to make sure your mics are muted and your video is on. Sounds like everybody in this room has that already. Yeah, though the residency is observing a hybrid in-person online model for those of us who are not yet vaccinated or comfortable attending live events, the purpose of the residency is to engage with each other, to learn together, and to share this space. So we encourage everybody to turn on their videos so long as you're able. And we would also like to remind you that throughout the duration of the residency, speakers, readers, teachers, and hosts will not be closely monitoring the chat function on Zoom in real time. That does not mean that you can't use it. We've designated somebody to monitor all comments and questions in the chat section and read these aloud. So please note, if you have questions or comments, definitely use the chat section for that, as it is still reserved for that purpose. And now I will pass on to Jay.
Hey, Justin, thank you. I'm going to check in with you probably in about 20 minutes in terms of the chat. Hi, everybody. I need to, gosh, I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. Let's see.
I'm ready.
So I'm going to continue for a couple minutes to upload the handout. I'd like to read an acknowledgement. Well, one, I'd like to say how excited I am for Sarah Bat's class at 4 o'clock, and I hope you all attend it. It's repetition meaning, and Sarah Bat is an alumna of PNCA, and she's on. They're on the precipice of receiving their MFA at PNCA. And so it felt quite appropriate for Sarah Bat to lead us into this new experience. So I just want to thank you in advance, Sarah Bat. Super excited. That's at 4 o'clock. The word transition is core language to describing transgender experience. I have been working on this talk for many months, and my reading has included lots of transgender writers in multiple books on trans poetics and trans theory. In particular, We Want It All, edited by Andrea Abi Kalam and Kay Gabriel. And I'm recommending all of these books. And a book that is its sort of antecedent, Troubling the Line, or precedent, I'm sorry, edited by Trace Peterson and T.C. Tolbert. Also the writings of Jan Morris, Susan Stryker's Transgender History. I've come to understand that my own subject position, cisgender man, necessitates intensive, careful reception, transmission of transgender experience. And at this moment, sharing those attempts would be more hurtful than helpful to the transgender community. I'm looking at this talk as a kind of beginning of a larger work, and perhaps my engagement with trans poetics will find, sorry, I'm gonna break in. Hey, Wendy, we are recording this on YouTube. I'm looking at this talk as a kind of beginning of a larger work, and perhaps my engagement with trans poetics will find has already found its way in this work. And even though transpoetics cannot be reduced to any one set of strategies or elements, I have noticed lots of collage and braiding structures, which Abi Karam identifies in their introduction. And Susan Stryker's definition of transition, which I've included in the handout, in her book, Transgender History, perhaps does give us a compelling way to consider collage or transition. Quote, the movement across a socially imposed boundary away from an imposed starting place, rather than any particular destination or mode of transition. I do recommend just want to make sure everybody's muted in the room. Sound muted. Got it? Okay. I do recommend these books I've mentioned, along with the books their respective editors have written. T.C. Tolbert, love this book. We included a piece of their work, My Melissa, in our genre reader. And many other works, including T. Fleshman, Samuel Ace, Raquel Salas Rivera, Jay Dodd, the films of Harry Dodge. I want to honor the experiences of transgender people by doing more listening. I also did lots of thinking about translation, but have chosen not to share those panels either. This talk is called In Transit, and I just recently changed the title to, it has two titles, In Transit, and the second title is Be Planetary Pass. It is for the Sisters of the Holy Names. It has an epigraph. It means, the epigraph is Atel Adnan, who figures quite a bit in this talk. It means that I followed lines I never saw, went on uncharted roads, didn't emerge from any confusion. The present was forever blowing. 1, I want to encourage maximal mindfulness in the spaces to which we refer as transitional. That's in quotations. I want to stop this habit I have cultivated that whiteness and masculinity and capitalism have instilled in me, to shoot myself so far beyond where I actually am into what I believe, always incorrectly, what the next thing is. I want to allow myself to feel every single tick-tock of now, every oscillation of in-betweenness, because when I do arrive, think I have arrived, inhabiting what I refer to as next, my son will be living in a dorm hundreds of miles from my apartment. His childhood most definitely over, and I shall be alone. 2, what do we call instances in space-time that are not in transition? After we have arrived, once we've begun the job, unpacked the last box, delivered the baby, assigned an agreed upon definition to one's romantic relationship, after the meal has been served, after we exit the airlock and begin our spacewalk. What verb describes this action? What noun describes this condition? Engagement with fulfillment, living, becoming. It's all clunky. The words are all clunky. I've been referring to it as the motion towards. 3. Our cosmonauts are now ready to get out of their spacecraft. They leave a special door called airlock, an airtight passage that contains doors at both ends. Cosmonauts go through the first door, lock it tight behind them, then open the second door without any air escaping the spacecraft. On a spacewalk, cosmonauts use safety tethers to remain connected to their spacecraft, keeping them from floating away. Tethers are like ropes. One end hooks to the spacewalker, the other connects to the spacecraft. Cosmonauts tether their tools to their spacesuits. I want to be an oxygen-rich passage that prevents air from escaping. I want to be the silvery tether that keeps the cosmonauts from floating away. 4. The world on and beyond the page is one world composed of multiple species of bodies, sentient and insentient, woven together in a massive webbed network, standing in connection and alone, often at once, porous and edged, like a perforated line, like a river that by turns swells and narrows and eventually flows through an estuary, fingers of fresh and salt waters clasping, filling each other into the sea. What I mean to say, thinking about transitions beyond the page is thinking about transitions on the page. Isn't it apparent? We are always in transit, sort of like giving up the punchline there. Always becoming something, in mystery, perhaps nameable, but also ineffable. If we choose to name an experience in our lives as transitional, a move from one city to another, from school to work, from school to summer, weaning a baby from breastfeeding, menopause, maybe we are with sincerity attempting to understand the connective tissue, what that feels like, in order to locate where we come from and where we might arrive at. So now starting to get into some intersections with Allison's talk, the wake. This is human behavior. We tell stories to locate ourselves. The development of language originates from this need. I realize that thinking about transit is perhaps taking me to what my body really needs to consider, the slip and spill of a loss in progress. Anticipatory grief. My interest here is the present moment, feeling, apprehending, tracking, naming all the textures of the motion towards. 6. This is a brand new translation. It's not a new book, but the translation is new, and I'm reading a couple passages from it. From Migratory Birds by Mexican writer Mariana Oliver, translation Julia Sanchez. Migration is one of the most fascinating behavioral patterns of certain bird species, an enduring need for repetition that compels them to travel great distances, even at risk to their lives. Hence, the reason they fly in groups. In a flock, the bird that acts as a guide and figurehead is also one that breaks the wind, mitigating air resistance for other birds. Day after day, they swap positions and share the burden of their journey. Among migrating birds, permanence is an acceptance of death. 7. When I think about transitional matter on the page, I'm thinking about the combination of language and blank space that orients the reader to the passage of space-time. explicit language signaling motion in time and place, shifts in point of view. Those passages, long and short, through which we move towards the next instance. I'm thinking about the language towards the end of a passage, opening up into blank space, like language that's at the end of the line. I'm thinking about the pauses a writer attempts to offer the reader. And I'm thinking about the blank space itself, this great open tunnel. Imagine a vertical tunnel rising from the Earth's core through our bodies out into the universe, through which we move from one text to the next. I'm thinking about points of arrival and departure, guides, respites, resets, launches, labyrinths, free falls, tethers, returns. I'm gonna upload the handout again, just in case people are arriving late. The handout, by the way, just has all the quotes on it. When we leave off, oh, I'm sorry, just skipped the section. 8. Perhaps you might think of it as an aesthetic continuum in which at one end, the writer presents transitional matter that is explicit, textual, and concrete, while at the other end lives the writer swimming within and in between in a single stroke, who trusts the reader to engage their own orienting capacities. This latter approach is more instinctual, lyrical, nonlinear, and collaborative. 9. Where we leave off and begin again, those particular words. So I'm thinking here about the ends of passages and the beginnings of passages, just to be very concrete. Where we leave off and begin again, those particular words, the sounds those words emit, what they represent, the feelings they express, the semantics they transfer, gains heightened emphasis within and beyond our bodies, helping to build additional meaning. We create within any text for the reader a series of pauses, fecund centers in which readers finish receiving one body of language while coming back into their own. Within a text, we present transitional matter, spaces, to the reader that form the work's idiosyncratic structure. 10. Let alone the blank space within, between, and around the letters, words, phrases, and punctuation marks. Oh, I'd love to curl up inside the uppercase G and take a nap. Okay, there are 2 sections that I'm actually going to cut and paste into the chat because they are kind of concrete poetry stuff. And they're the most concrete parts of the talk. Oh, so it's going to just take me a second. Okay, I'm having issues cutting and pasting, so I'm just going to continue reading. So this is an inventory of explicit transitional matter. This explicit transitional matter is often used in novels in order to communicate 2 kinds of, for lack of better phrasing, plot pause. The first kind of plot pause occurs between scenes and can accommodate shifts in space-time, including point of view. The second occurs mid-scene. I'm thinking about Diane Williams stories in particular. That is, the scene literally pauses and then picks up again. So here is some of the tools or what you might call transitional matter that is explicit. That is, it's in the text, it's in the language. 1, descriptions of time passing or setting, often within the first 2 sentences of any given narrative paragraph. Point of view blocking, description of point of view. So a point of view blocking is just something, usually it's at the beginning of a passage, and it's a description of the point of view character, including name or pronouns, with a glimpse of interiority that signals to the reader whose story this is, whose consciousness we're in. More experimental fiction writers might flip this by immersing the reader in a character's interiority, then mid-paragraph include language that orients the reader to the writing's point of view. Examples might be Deborah Eisenberg and Yoko Tawada. Yoko Tawada, love Yoko Tawada right now. Another kind of explicit language, description of action that reveals the advancement or release of dramatic conflict, often taking place at the end of scenes or summaries of action. Now we're moving into more poetic stuff that's explicit. So explicit language that repeats, reiterates, echoes the paragraph's central point. Explicit language, rhetorical language, in particular logical language or logos, that points to how and why one idea or thought might connect with the next idea or thought. I mean, it might be simply as connective words like subsequently or other examples or that kind of thing. Explicit language that uses metaphor or image and then offers its own consideration of the metaphor's object and how that may relate to the work's core theme. There are writers who use metaphor and then actually attempt to explain it for the reader. Anaphoric language or anaphora, the use of one word or phrase at the beginning of successive lines or sentences or stanzas. This is a form of repetition, which Sarah Batt's going to be talking about. And rhythmic structuring that signals to the reader the next textual instance is unfolding. It comes from the Greek meaning to carry up and back, which suggests that this is continuation phrasing, phrasing that grounds the reader and at the same time extends outwards. Each repetition carries all past instances while pulsing towards all future instances. The poet and jazz musician and vocalist Jane Cortez filled her poems with anaphoras. So I am now going to play a poem called I Am New York City by Jane Cortez. And I do want to acknowledge my colleague Sharita Town, who just did an amazing show that was inspired by the poetry of Jane Cortez. So there's a lot of different anaphora going on in this poem. It's not just one. And you have the poem in the handout, but I'm going to now play this video.
I am New York City. Here is my brain of hot sauce, my tobacco teeth, my mattress of bed bug tongue. Legs apart, hand on chin, war on the roof, insults, pointed fingers, push carts, my contraceptive salt. Look at my pelvis flushing. I am New York City of blood, police, and fried pies. I rub my docks red with grenadine and jelly madness in a flow of tokay. My huge skull of pigeons, my seance of peeping toms, my plaited ovaries, excuse me. This is my grime, my thigh of steel spoons and toothpicks. I imitate no one. I am New York City of the brown spit and soft tomatoes. Give me my confetti of flesh, my marquee of false nipples, my sideshow of open beaks, in my nose of soot, in my ox-bled eyes, in my ear of Saturday night specials. I eat ha-ha, he, and ho-ho. I am New York City. Never change, never sleep, never melt. My shoes are incognito. Cadavers grow from my goatee. Look, I sparkle with shit, with wishbones. My nickname is Glue Me. Take my face of stink bombs, my star-spangled banner of hot dogs. Take my beer can junta, my reptilian ass of footprints, and approach me through life, approach me through death, approach me through my widow's peak, through my split ends, my asthmatic laugh. Approach me through my wash rag, half ankle, half elbow. Massage me with your camphor tears. Salute the patina and concrete of my rat tail wig. Face up, face down, piss into the bite of our handshake. I am New York City, my skillet-head friend, my fat-bellied comrade. Citizens, break wind with me.
So that is the second windbreak, by the way, that we've had in this talk. All right, back to, sorry. Highly recommend you checking out Jane Cortez. Now we come to some intersections from Allison's talk. So this is a quote from Allison's talk from one of her slides. What wake we leave in our creative work, looking closely at what we leave behind and what we carry forward over time and across space. I want to live within this wake and at the same time, the body's motion towards the wake and the boat. Here is the second list or inventory. Now we're getting into more poetics. So this is an inventory of implicit transitional matter accommodated through blank space. Often we use juxtaposition to make sense of our passage through the blank space. Our minds hold up proximal panels, objects, actions, conditions, and consider how they are alike and how they are different. The negotiation between alike and different creates a footbridge across which we walk. So here are four kinds of implicit transitional matter. The first is the thematic through line. Sometimes it's explicit and sometimes it's implicit. This is now a convention among creative nonfiction writers. Blank space signals shifts might occur in space-time, point of view, materials, genre, and mode. When I say mode, I mean like inquiry, story, dream, reportage, documentation. The accretion of theme, of meaning gets deployed through the shifts. The blank space gives the reader and writer space-time to receive this vertical expansion of meaning. This is travel without too much signage and propels us into wilder forms of associative transitioning. Number two, so the first one is thematic through line. Number two is disruption. This is an offshoot of thematic through line in that readers use the blank space to receive the multiple threads that become the through line into the next section. Us readers, we are anticipating connectivity. That's what's happening in that blank space, only to find text that abruptly describes and enacts a disjunction. The language at the end of one section, the blank space, the language beginning the next section, all serve to create that disruption. Disruption might rise from violence, often violence rising from a surface that appears connective, but disruption is also an important form of resistance and liberation. Surrealist scholar Roger Shattuck catalogs associative structuring in his book Banquet Years. It's mostly about the French surrealist poets of the early 20th century. And he includes a category for disjunctive leaps. Think about the etymology from the Latin disruptus, meaning break apart, split, shatter, break to pieces. One is in transit within and towards the breakage. That's a tough place to be, isn't it? To be in transit within and towards the breakage. Echolocation. When Allison's talk encountered and described echolocation yesterday, massive joy feelings within I experienced. Sonic, atmospheric, and semantic echoes that orient the reader to particulars of space-time. The transit space here encourages the ear to open wider, which is to say the language at the end and the beginning of subsequent text blocks draws the reader's attention to the auditory mode. As Allison's talk mentioned yesterday, paraphrasing here, us readers, we locate ourselves in relation. And then here, I'm gonna repeat it. Here's that passage from Alexis Pauline Gumb's Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Animals. Allison mentioned it yesterday in her talk, and that book is incredible. Definitely put it all on your list for the next semester. Instead of simply identifying what was what, I had to go deeper. I took my cue from the many marine mammals who echolocate. I had to focus not on what I could see and discern, but instead on where I was in relation, how the sound bouncing off me in relationship to structures and environments that surround me locates me in a constantly shifting relationship to you, whoever you are by now. End quote. The reader and writer put to use a more physical, less cerebral approach to juxtaposition. Christine Hume's Saturation Project, Lynn Higinian's My Life, Jenny Bully's, all of Jenny's works, all of Clarice Lispector's works. Okay, the final kind of implicit transition is called the cosmos. As is the case in Atel Adnan's last 5 books, Season, Sea and Fog, Night, Surge, Shifting the Silence, the transitional matter signifies to the reader that the author has invited into the blank space the indefinite and ever expanding universe, and that there are no limitations on what the next text block might reveal. Anything and everything is through line. One cannot disrupt the operations of the spirit world. Let's see, Justin, just quick Chat check. You like everything's okay?
We're good in the chat.
Great. 14. Do not mistake me for a regretful father who wishes he'd been able to step away from the office to spend more time with his son. During his childhood, Oscar and I shared a significant amount of space time together, way more than I spent with my parents. And I'm not saying that because I want a reward either. It's just that one day it's there, his childhood, mine too, this soft ghost driving us to so many new places. And the next day it disappears. And you don't see it disappear, and you see every fucking moment of its fading. The next day he shuts the door to his bedroom. Next day he's driving himself to cross-country practice. The next day he's not going to be home for dinner. I'm aware I want something impossible. I want to slow down time. And I'm falling in love with slowness in all of its forms. I'm skipping, by the way, so the handout has more quotes than I'm going to be able to read. 16, if you are in imminent danger, if you inhabit a subject position that colonizing capital white hypermasculine cisgender culture does not protect, if you live in a Black body, a brown body, a female body, a queer body, a disabled body, a neurodiverse body, if you carry trauma in your body in such a way that your nervous system communicates that you are in harm's way, if you are immersed in feelings of pain, of despair, grief, then there's only immersed feeling, the release from which seems an impossible abstraction. There is no transition, just fear, pain, severance, death, death within living, suffering. 17, Randall Kennan's book, The Fire This Time, which is a play on James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. Perhaps one day I will write the story of Travis and his mother and of the existential grimness that is so much at the heart of what we all must face, death, death of our loved ones and our own, without the tools, the wisdom, the aid to grasp it entire, the fear of being taken away to an even worse hell. In my stumbling attempts, the only tools that I found in all the vast arsenal of Western culture of any use to even approach this sad, sad story is that of the blues. Two passages from the beautiful lyric essay book called Pain Studies by Lisa Olstein, which is about her experience with chronic pain around migraine. Fundamentally, a creature of the present, physical pain remembered is by definition pain divorced. The difference between recalling the flu and having it, between expecting a child and having it, is like the difference between hearing a description of waves and drowning. Lisa Olstein, again. Drowning is one of the words we use to describe pain when we're desperately in it, though often it's used for other things too, heartbreak, overwhelm. I've never experienced anything close to drowning, but I imagine that, like pain, it has a way of flooding you with the present. Yes, it makes you hazy. It fogs up memory's edges. But in the moment, it is the moment, and you are nowhere else except only exactly where it puts you. This is from Migratory Birds by Mariana Oliver. Translation, Julia Sanchez. Before their habitat was destroyed and their population was decimated by hunters, whooping cranes lived in North America and migrated south every year. By the 1940s, they were a species condemned to disappear, reduced to a series of photographs. A group of cranes was raised in captivity in a bid to save them, but the results fell short. Once they were reintroduced into the wild, the cranes were reluctant to breed, and when they did, were unable to care for their colts. Come fall, they ignored their instinct to migrate and joined a group of sedentary birds. They didn't survive. In captivity, cranes never live beyond infancy. 21. To organize the world, to create a structure that includes passageways from one space to the next, requires a kind of psychic middle ground, close enough to the foreground to feel the thing and distant enough to stand back and see part of the larger structure. From this middle ground, we can reflect, alter, integrate, dream, make. This is a privilege. 24. Let's return to this question I posed earlier about experiences one does not identify as transitional matter. If we are not in transit, then where are we? What do we call this? I continue to hear the phrase as if someone else were telling me, whispering in my ear, the motion towards. There are and are not destinations. The destination is an illusion, a dream of whiteness to keep us from acknowledging, let alone looking back into the wake. To return to Susan Stryker, quote, rather than any particular destination or mode of transition. The notion of the motion towards makes me think of the paintings of mid-century artist Jacob Lawrence. And I'm going to show a couple paintings in a minute, but I'm going to read first. Lawrence's parents migrated from the South to the East Coast, specifically Philadelphia and later Harlem, where he spent his adolescence and young adulthood. His work appeared in these massive series of paintings, often panels he numbered. There are 60 panels in the Migration series. And they tell maximalist narratives of the African diaspora and the Great Migration, of which he and his parents were a part. His paintings describe the Black community in motion, often in incredibly dramatic instances of coming together or in conflict, in agreement, in celebration, in suffering, in learning, and in play. I love in particular two panels. I'm going to share these with you for a second. The library is the first one. And the second panel is the Migration series, panel 58. Just take a look. You can also just search for them on your own internet feed if you'd like. Panel 58. Panel 58 shows three young girls wearing brightly colored dresses, working together on numerals in sequence. Lawrence stated that Harlem, specifically during the period of the Great Depression, shaped his painter's palette, a variety of bright colors. Lawrence told historian Paul Karlstrom, quote, "People of my mother's generation would decorate their homes in all sorts of color," end quote. These bright colors heightened further by vivid, discernible geometric patterning of shapes and lines. His figures, the objects, the setting itself, everything moves, is active, is dancing in collaboration. The library shows a man in the foreground pushing a shelving cart while behind him an adult, their parent, another librarian, kneels down to speak at the child's level. They're looking at books together, along with three other figures reading amid the stacks. The library itself appears well used, books checked out from the shelves, leaning against one another where there are gaps. His figures are in the motion towards. Both paintings recall one of my favorite passages from Bell Hook's book on critical pedagogy called Teaching to Transgress. I love these two paragraphs. They're in the handout. Almost all of our teachers at Booker T. Washington were Black women. They were committed to nurturing intellect so that we could become scholars, thinkers, and cultural workers. Black folks who used our minds. We learned early that our devotion to learning, to a life of the mind, was a counter-hegemonic act, a fundamental way to resist every strategy of white racist colonization. Though they did not define or articulate these practices in theoretical terms, my teachers were enacting a revolutionary pedagogy of resistance that was profoundly anti-colonial. Within these segregated schools, Black children who were deemed exceptional, gifted, were given special care. Teachers worked with and for us to ensure that we would fulfill our intellectual destiny, and by doing so, uplift the race. My teachers were on a mission. To fulfill that mission, my teachers made sure they knew us. They knew our parents, our economic status, where we worshiped, what our homes were like, and how we were treated in the family. I went to a school at a historical moment where I was being taught by the same teachers who had taught my mother, her sisters, and brothers. My effort and ability to learn was always contextualized within the framework of generational family experience. Certain behaviors, gestures, habits of being were traced back. Attending school then was sheer joy. I loved being a student. I loved learning. School was the place of ecstasy, pleasure, and danger. To be changed by ideas was pure pleasure, but to learn ideas that ran counter to values and beliefs learned at home was to place oneself at risk, to enter the danger zone. Home was the place where I was forced to conform to someone else's image of who and what I should be. School was the place where I could forget that self and, through ideas, reinvent myself. Little pause. My favorite way to enjoy TV is to listen to it from another room, preferably the bathtub. Oscar's out there watching a game, Suns against Clippers. I ask him what the score is every 5 minutes or so. He reports back, 70-68, he says, excited that the game is close. He reports exceptional plays, terrible calls the referees make. 78-64, he says, his tone matter of fact, nonplussed. I could care less about the game, about the score. I just want to hear his voice carry towards me. The clock is ticking. Stevens calls it planetary pass. 27. I'm skipping around. Consider the transition between two entries in Diary of a Young Girl. Definitive edition by Anne Frank. The obvious transitional matter consists of the closing salutation, blank space, the new date of the second entry, and the opening salutation, Dear Kitty. She's writing in her diary, but you all might remember, she's named her diary Kitty because she wants to have a best friend. So we're talking about two subsequent entries, pages 17 to 21. The first entry is July 5th, 1950, and I'm talking about the, it's not the first entry of the book, just to be clear. So the first entry I'm speaking of is July 5th, 1942. And the second is on Wednesday, July 8th, 1942. That is 3 days. One Sunday afternoon, the 5th, young Anne at home, she's writing in her still new journal. She began the journal in June, the day of her 13th birthday. She's writing in her still new journal, considering things like grades, her friends' parents. She reports that her father has mentioned the possibility of their going into hiding. This is the first she's heard about it, but you get the idea that the rest of the family, her older sibling, her older sister, they know it's coming. And that they've been slowly packing up and moving out their clothes to other people's houses. The entry also makes mention of the anti-Jewish decrees. So next fall, she's talking about how she now has to attend the Jewish Lyceum. This first entry cuts off when she hears the doorbell ring. The second entry, 3 days later, Anne has gone into hiding. So that's the July 8th. The next three entries, July 8th, July 9th, and 10th, describe what happens in the space between the doorbell ringing and the moment she sits down to write in her journal in hiding. Sometimes the blank space has very little to do with the reader. Sometimes the writer gets a knock at the door and must close her diary. Sometimes that knock at the door is a murderous regime that has come for nothing short of violence. Sometimes that knock at the door means a teenage girl must leave her home, must leave behind her beloved cat forever. Sometimes that blank space is the difference between freedom and captivity. '28. I'm now returning, by the way, to the inventory of implicit transitional methods. And I'm going to talk at length about the cosmos, the cosmic transitional matter. Cosmic transitional matter tends to show up in works by artists whose acute sensitivity to the world within and beyond their perceptual fields throws open a portal, many portals at once, to the beyond worlds. You find these kinds of transitions in works by Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Alice Munro, Cecilia Vicuña, Alice Notley, Nathaniel Mackey. And I would put the poetry and prose of Brandon Shimoda in this category too. If you put all of these writers in a single spacecraft, Clarice Lispector would be its pilot and Atel Adnan its navigator. The later works of Adnan, which I've mentioned already, Seasons, Sea and Fog, Night, Shifting the Silence, offer us a concrete glimpse of cosmic transitional matter. At 96 years old, Adnan continues to paint and write, and the work gets better and better. At the surface level, her most recent book, Shifting the Silence, which I highly recommend, and this is an image also of her painting, is about the experience of living in this deep elder state. It's composed of brief prose blocks, diaristic, lyrical, philosophical. In the blank space between texts, the author receives, transmits the indefinite and ever expanding universe, which means there are no limitations on what the next text block might reveal. As she writes in Night, quote, I and spirit are immersed into each other. By stages in the night's fiber, the body becomes visionary. Here are two text blocks from Shifting the Silence. The first describing and enacting this openness to the world. And again, these are in your handouts. You know, sunsets are violently beautiful. I would say that they are so by definition, but there are lights not even colorful in the habitual sense. Lights, elemental, mercurial, silvery, sulfurous, copper made, that make us stop, then lose balance, make us open our arms, not knowing what else to do, arrest us as if struck by a lightning, a soft lightning, a welcome one. I wait for those lights. I know some of you do too, wherever you are. I mean, when you are standing by an ocean alone within the calmness of your spirit, be planetary. I want to go to those places that my dreams open up or that are discovered on postcards or advertisements. This could be pathetic, but it is not, as its intensity redeems it. Tonight, I looked on the internet at red mountains in southern France. They're made of porphyros. They're as red as some mountains in Oman, some others in Arizona. We're on a planet sustained by nothing, carried through pure space by a willful star made of fire and in constant ebullition. We're travelers covering traveling grounds, going, always going. In Anne Frank's final entry, the narrator does not write as if she's writing the book's final entry. She does not know that in 3 days' time, after she writes this entry, the morning of August 4th, 1944, between 10 and 10:30 a.m., a car will pull up at 263 Prinsengracht. Inside the car are the SS sergeant and Dutch security forces who will arrest 8 people hiding in the secret annex. They pilfered all of the Franks, Van Don's, and Mr. Dussel's valuables. Anne's diary was left behind, eventually to be found by Miep Gies, friend and caretaker. Gies kept the diary in her desk drawer till Otto, the only survivor of the family, returned to Amsterdam after the death camps were liberated. Imagine Otto Frank reading his daughter's diary. Sit with this dream of Otto Frank reading his daughter's diary. He comes to the final entry, which does in fact read not only like an ending, but a masterful ending. Otto feels the expanse of his daughter's careful, close consideration, the pace of the prose slowing, of one of his daughter's struggles. Who's the Anne Frank she knows herself to be? Who's the version of Anne known by her parents, sister, the Van Dons, and Dussel? Quote, I've told you many times I've split in two, end quote. The ending resolves nothing, only deepens the reader's experience by recording how she has changed in hiding, also signaling like a flashing arrow towards what comes next, what might have come next. This passage shows her holding onto the contradictions in a way that describes what she has become: a woman, a writer. I am just going to, well, actually, I'll do that in a second. Sorry. The transition from the entry's closing salutation to the phrase, "Anne's diary ends here," has the feel of both a terrorizing slam, imagine the Franks hearing the footsteps on the stairs, and an immeasurably indefinite time expanse lasting from her closing the diary's pages and putting her diary in a private space to the horrifying image described by a survivor of Auschwitz who recalls the Frank sisters dying, starving to death on the dirt floor of their barracks. Margot dying first, and then Anne a few days later. This in February or March of 1945. Imagine those few days. After Margot has died and Anne remains. Who wrote that sentence? Anne's diary ends here. Her father, can you imagine her father putting the book into a manuscript and writing the sentence, "Anne's diary ends here"? When one of the sisters of the holy names approaches death, the sisters begin a ritual. One sister sits at their dying sister's bedside for exactly 1 hour. They switch at the top of every hour and remain at their bedside till either the next sister shows up to relieve or till the dying sister passes. Atel Adnan. This takes me back to the love for funerals I had when I was still too young to start kindergarten. Those funerals were a neighborhood affair. I would run to the window and see old men, blind men, opening up a procession and chanting prayers, followed by men crying silently and some of them carrying the coffin and a few more men following, the storekeepers standing by their doors. I was awestruck. And then finally, I will end with this sentence from Gloria Azualda, first in Spanish. Caminante, no hay puentes, se hace puentes al andar. Voyager, there are no bridges. One builds them as one walks. Thanks, everybody. I would like to, Justin, is there anything on the chat? I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I can just read. I'll read the last 4 comments.
Okay.
Riley just said, Atel Adnan is absolutely incredible. Larry says, I often ponder deep time. Manya wrote, I think this is a quote from you, Jay. I'm falling in love with slowness in all its forms. Lydia says, the form of this presentation is stellar, exceptionally aware of numbered explicit transitions. I completely agree. And then the rest.
Thanks, Justin. I'm gonna, I really want you all to have the text of those inventories. So I'm just gonna post them on a handout on homeroom. And it is 11:05. So if people want to have conversations with me on the side, feel free to do so. But I think I want to respect everybody's time. And I really want to thank you all for your attention and for your listening. And we will see you